The Blue Note hummed with a low, comfortable thrum. It wasn't the kind of place that screamed for attention. Instead, it offered a quiet sophistication, a haven for those who appreciated a well-mixed cocktail and the murmur of conversation over the gentle clinking of ice. The lighting was dim, a warm amber glow that cast long shadows and softened the edges of the worn wooden bar. Behind it, Jake, the bartender, moved with a practiced ease, a silent ballet of polished glasses and expertly poured drinks. He knew his regulars, their usual orders memorized, their lives glimpsed through the casual conversations that punctuated the evening. Jake wasn't unkind, not exactly. He was just efficient. He saw his job as a transaction, a precise exchange of money for alcohol, a service rendered with a minimum of fuss. He didn't waste time on pleasantries unless they were strategically advantageous. A quick smile for a generous tipper, a curt nod for the regulars who kept the till ringing. He possessed a certain charisma, a smooth charm that could disarm the wary and entice the hesitant. But it was a carefully cultivated facade, a tool to achieve his ends, not a genuine expression of warmth. Tonight was typical. The usual crowd trickled in, a mix of city professionals unwinding after a long day, couples sharing quiet moments, and lone figures nursing their drinks in contemplative silence. The air thrummed with a low, comfortable energy, a shared understanding of the unspoken rules of the Blue Note. Relax, enjoy, and don't make a fuss. Jake polished a glass with practiced precision, the rhythmic swish of the cloth a counterpoint to the gentle jazz drifting from the speakers. He glanced at the clock, noting the steady progression of time, each minute bringing him closer to the end of his shift and the promise of a quiet evening at home. He surveyed his domain, a practiced eye scanning the bar for potential customers, assessing their likely orders, anticipating their needs before they even voiced them. He was a master of his craft, a conductor of the evening's rhythm, orchestrating the flow of drinks and conversations with an almost imperceptible hand. He wiped down the counter, the damp cloth leaving a streak of shine on the dark wood. His gaze drifted towards the entrance, a habitual check for new arrivals. A man entered, his presence a subtle shift in the bar's atmosphere. He wasn't flashy, not dressed in the sharp suits of the city professionals or the casual chic of the younger crowd. He wore simple, dark clothing, a worn leather jacket, and carried a worn canvas bag slung over his shoulder. His face was calm, his expression unreadable, his eyes observant but not intrusive. Jake watched him approach the bar, a silent assessment playing out in his mind. He looked different, not in a way that was immediately striking, but in a subtle way that set him apart from the usual clientele. He was black, his skin the rich shade of dark chocolate, his features sharp and defined. He paused at the bar, his gaze sweeping over the selection of spirits, a quiet contemplation that felt out of place in the bar's usual, lively energy. Jake waited, his usual practiced ease faltering slightly. He expected the man to order, to break the silence, but the man remained still, his gaze fixed on a particular bottle of whiskey. A flicker of something, doubt, crossed Jake's mind. He found himself hesitating, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. The usual smooth efficiency that characterized his interactions with customers seemed to have momentarily deserted him. He cleared his throat, the sound oddly loud in the relative quiet of the bar. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone sharper than he intended. The man looked up, his eyes meeting Jake's. There was no nervousness, no apprehension, just a quiet dignity that disarmed Jake's preconceived notions. He opened his mouth to speak, but Jake cut him off. "What'll it be?" Jake asked, his voice still edged with a curtness that felt inappropriate, even to him. He found himself scrutinizing the man's clothes, his worn shoes, the simple, unbranded bag. A seed of doubt, a prejudice he hadn't realized he harbored, began to take root in his mind. He found himself already making assumptions, judging the man before he even knew his name. Samuel hesitated, a slight furrow in his brow. He hadn't expected this kind of reception. He'd entered the Blue Note expecting the usual anonymity of a quiet drink in a dimly lit bar, a place to observe and be unobserved. He'd chosen this particular establishment for its reputation, a place known for its quality drinks and its discreet clientele. He hadn't anticipated encountering such blatant prejudice. He'd been traveling for days, a whirlwind tour of small clubs and intimate venues, his schedule a blur of performances, interviews, and hurried meals. He craved a moment of quiet, a chance to simply be, to unwind before the next leg of his journey. He'd spotted the blue note from across the street, its warm glow beckoning him in like a promise of respite. He'd intended to order a simple glass of whiskey, a familiar comfort in the midst of his hectic schedule. The bottle he'd been eyeing, a high-end Japanese whiskey, was a small luxury he allowed himself after a successful tour. He'd earned it. But now, facing Jake's curtness, the simple act of ordering felt charged with a significance he hadn't anticipated. He opened his mouth to speak, to order the whiskey, to assert his right to be served like any other customer, but the words caught in his throat. He wasn't one for confrontation, not in this setting. He preferred to let his music do the talking, to let his talent speak for itself. Direct conflict wasn't his style. Diplomacy and quiet observation were his preferred weapons. He looked at Jake, his gaze steady despite the underlying tension. He saw the subtle shift in the bartender's demeanor, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw, the barely concealed disdain in his eyes. It wasn't overt racism, not the kind that screamed from the rooftops, but a subtle, insidious prejudice, a silent judgment based on appearance alone. It was a familiar feeling, one he'd encountered countless times throughout his life, a constant low hum of unspoken bias that accompanied him like a shadow. He considered his options. He could make a scene, challenge Jake's assumptions, demand to be served. But that wasn't his way. It would only escalate the situation, draw unwanted attention, and disrupt the quiet evening he craved. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for a drink. He considered leaving, simply walking out and finding another bar, another place where his presence wouldn't be met with unspoken judgment. But the thought felt like a defeat, a concession to the prejudice he was facing. He refused to be intimidated, to be driven away by a bartender's assumptions. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. He would not let this minor inconvenience ruin his evening. He would not let Jake's prejudice dictate his actions. He would simply leave. He would find another bar, another place where his presence wouldn't be a problem. He turned away from the bar, his movements slow and deliberate, his head held high. He didn't look back, didn't offer a word of protest, didn't engage in the confrontation he knew would only serve to validate Jake's assumptions. He simply walked away, the quiet dignity of his departure a silent rebuke to the prejudice he'd encountered. As he walked towards the exit, he noticed a few patrons glancing at him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and confusion. He ignored them, focusing on his exit, his mind already planning his next move. He would find a different bar, a place where he could enjoy his whiskey in peace, where his presence wouldn't be met with unspoken judgment. He didn't need the blue note, and he certainly didn't need Jake's approval. He had a reputation to uphold, a career to pursue, and a life to live. And he would do it on his own terms. He would not let a single act of prejudice derail his evening or his life. The quiet dignity of Samuel's departure left Jake with a lingering unease. He hadn't intended to be rude, not exactly. It wasn't a conscious act of racism, not in the blatant, hateful way he'd witnessed in other places. It was more subtle, a quick judgment based on appearance, a snap decision fueled by a lifetime of ingrained biases he hadn't fully examined. He'd seen countless men come into the bar dressed similarly, but something about Samuel's quiet demeanor, his unassuming presence, had triggered a knee-jerk reaction, a subconscious assessment that led to his abrupt refusal of service. He watched Samuel walk away, the man's quiet dignity a stark contrast to the casual arrogance he usually displayed. A flicker of doubt, a tiny seed of unease, began to sprout in the fertile ground of his complacency. It wasn't a full-blown realization, not yet, but a subtle shift in his perspective, a crack in the armor of his self-assuredness. He tried to dismiss it, to brush it off as a minor incident, a momentary lapse in his usually flawless performance. He told himself it was just a busy night, a crowded bar, a simple misjudgment. He busied himself with the next customer, pouring a martini with practiced precision, the rhythmic swish of the shaker a desperate attempt to drown out the nagging voice of doubt. But the unease persisted, a low hum beneath the surface of his usual confident demeanor. He found himself replaying the encounter in his mind, dissecting each moment, analyzing every detail. He saw the subtle hesitation in Samuel's eyes, the quiet dignity of his departure, the unspoken resentment that hung in the air. He saw the way the other patrons had glanced at Samuel, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and confusion. He saw the way Samuel had carried himself, his head held high, his movements deliberate, his dignity unwavering. The incident had disrupted the usual rhythm of the evening, a discordant note in the otherwise harmonious symphony of the bar. He found himself more aware of his surroundings, more attuned to the subtle nuances of the interactions between the patrons. The usual casual ease with which he navigated the bar had vanished, replaced by a heightened sense of awareness, a feeling of being watched, judged. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept wandering back to Samuel, to the quiet dignity of his departure, to the unspoken judgment that had fueled his refusal of service. He felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that he had done something wrong, something more than just a simple misjudgment. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a vulnerability that chipped away at his carefully constructed facade of confidence and control. The bar continued to fill up, the usual Friday night crowd swelling the room with a mix of laughter, conversation, and the clinking of glasses. But Jake found himself unable to fully engage, unable to recapture the usual ease and efficiency that characterized his performance. He felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that something was amiss, something more than just a busy night in a crowded bar. He tried to shake off the feeling, to dismiss it as a minor incident, but the image of Samuel walking away, his head held high, his dignity unwavering, continued to haunt him. He knew, deep down, that he had made a mistake, a judgment based on nothing more than a superficial assessment, a prejudice he hadn't even realized he possessed. And the nagging feeling of unease, the subtle shift in his perspective, continued to grow, a silent testament to the impact of his actions. The night, once a predictable routine, had become unexpectedly unsettling. The quiet dignity of Samuel's departure had shaken him to his core. The evening continued its relentless march forward, the bar growing increasingly crowded as the night deepened. The air buzzed with a low hum of anticipation, a collective energy that hinted at something special about to unfold. Jake, despite his earlier unease, found himself swept up in the usual rhythm of the bar, the practiced movements of pouring drinks, the quick exchanges with regulars, the almost hypnotic repetition of his tasks, providing a temporary distraction from the lingering discomfort of Samuel's departure. He polished glasses with a feverish intensity, the rhythmic swish of the cloth a desperate attempt to erase the memory of his earlier judgment. He tried to focus on the task at hand, to lose himself in the familiar routine, to drown out the nagging voice of doubt that whispered in the back of his mind. But the image of Samuel, his quiet dignity, his unassuming presence, continued to haunt him, a persistent reminder of his own failings. The music shifted, the mellow jazz giving way to a more upbeat tempo, the change in rhythm mirroring the growing excitement in the room. Whispers circulated among the patrons, a low hum of anticipation that grew louder with each passing minute. Jake, caught up in the rising energy, momentarily forgot his earlier unease, his focus shifting to the growing crowd, the increasing demands on his attention. He poured drinks, wiped down the counter, and exchanged pleasantries with regulars, his movements almost automatic, a practiced dance of efficiency and charm. He felt the familiar thrill of being the center of attention, the master of his domain, the conductor of the evening's rhythm. But beneath the surface, the unease persisted, a low hum of discomfort that refused to be silenced. The bar owner, a jovial man named Tony, emerged from the back room, his face beaming with an almost childlike excitement. He clapped his hands together, drawing the attention of the entire bar. A hush fell over the room, the usual chatter replaced by a collective anticipation. "Folks," Tony announced, his voice booming across the room, "tonight, we have a very special surprise for you. A guest performer, someone you've all heard of, someone who's graced stages all over the world. A wave of excited murmurs rippled through the crowd. Speculation ran rampant, names tossed about like confetti. Each suggestion met with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. The anticipation built, the energy in the room thickening, the air charged with a palpable sense of excitement. Tony paused for dramatic effect, a mischievous glint in his eye. He gestured towards the stage, a small, unassuming platform at the back of the bar, usually reserved for acoustic sets and impromptu performances. The spotlight flickered to life, casting a pool of light on the empty stage, the sudden illumination highlighting the growing anticipation in the room. Tony leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice filled with dramatic flair, "prepare to be amazed." The spotlight intensified, the music swelled, and a figure emerged from the shadows, stepping onto the stage. The figure was familiar. It was the man Jake had refused to serve earlier that evening. It was Samuel, the quiet, unassuming man who had left the bar without a word, the man whose dignity had been so quietly, so subtly challenged. The man who was now about to grace the stage as a legendary musician. Jake's earlier judgment, his unspoken prejudice, was about to be exposed in the most unexpected of ways. The unease he had felt earlier intensified, becoming a knot of apprehension in his stomach. The night was about to take a dramatic and unexpected turn. A collective gasp rippled through the bar. The murmur of excited speculation died instantly, replaced by a stunned silence. The patrons, initially caught up in the anticipation of a surprise guest, were now grappling with the unexpected revelation. The unassuming man who had been refused service earlier that evening was, in fact, the legendary musician they had all been anticipating. Jake felt a cold dread wash over him, a wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm him. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and clammy. His earlier unease had intensified, morphing into a full-blown panic. He watched, paralyzed, as Samuel adjusted the microphone, his movements precise and confident, his demeanor a stark contrast to the quiet humility he had displayed earlier. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. His casual prejudice, his snap judgment based solely on appearance, had been exposed in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. He had refused service to a musical legend, a man whose talent was renowned worldwide, a man whose presence was now electrifying the very bar he managed. The weight of his error pressed down on him, a crushing burden of guilt and shame. He looked around the bar, his eyes scanning the faces of the patrons. He saw the shock, the disbelief, the dawning realization on their faces. He saw the way they were looking at him, their expressions a mixture of astonishment and condemnation. He felt their judgment, a silent wave of disapproval that washed over him, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. He tried to disappear, to melt into the background, to become invisible. He wanted to crawl under the bar, to escape the intense scrutiny of the patrons, to avoid the inevitable consequences of his actions. But he was trapped, pinned in place by the weight of his own prejudice, his own foolish judgment. The music began, a soft melody that filled the room, a gentle prelude to the storm that was about to break. Samuel's fingers danced across the guitar strings, his touch delicate yet powerful, each note resonating with a depth of emotion that transcended the simple act of playing music. Jake watched, mesmerized, as Samuel's performance unfolded. He saw the way the music captivated the audience, the way it transported them to another realm, the way it evoked a range of emotions, from joy and excitement to sorrow and reflection. He saw the way the patrons were swaying to the rhythm, their faces lit by the soft glow of the stage lights, their eyes closed in blissful surrender. He saw the way Samuel's voice filled the room, his tone rich and resonant, his lyrics weaving a tapestry of stories and emotions, his words resonating with a depth of understanding that transcended the mundane. He heard the passion in his voice, the raw emotion that poured from his soul, the genuine connection he forged with his audience. He felt a growing sense of shame, a deep remorse for his earlier actions. He had judged a book by its cover, dismissed a man based on his appearance, and in doing so, had missed out on witnessing something truly extraordinary. He had allowed his own prejudices to blind him to the talent and artistry that stood before him, a talent that was now captivating the very bar he managed. The music swelled, building to a crescendo, the energy in the room reaching a fever pitch. Jake felt the weight of his error pressing down on him, the shame intensifying with each passing note. He was no longer just a bartender. He was a witness to something extraordinary, a silent observer to a performance that transcended the ordinary, a performance that exposed his own shortcomings in the most profound way imaginable. The weight of his prejudice was crushing him. The music was a revelation, and he was the only one who hadn't seen it coming. The music reached its peak, a powerful crescendo that filled the bar with a wave of pure emotion. Samuel's voice soared, his guitar weeping a mournful melody that resonated deep within the souls of the listeners. The room was silent, save for the music, the silence broken only by the occasional sigh or gasp of awe. Even Jake, lost in the intensity of the performance, found himself captivated, his earlier shame momentarily overshadowed by the sheer power of Samuel's artistry. As the final note faded, a hush fell over the room, a stunned silence that spoke volumes. Then slowly, tentatively at first, applause began. A single clap, then another, then a ripple of applause that quickly swelled into a thunderous ovation. The patrons, initially stunned by the revelation of Samuel's identity, were now completely enthralled by his performance. The applause continued, wave after wave of appreciation washing over Samuel, who stood on stage, his face etched with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. He bowed, a simple gesture that spoke volumes, acknowledging the outpouring of admiration. The applause continued, a testament to the power of his music, the magic he had woven with his guitar and his voice. Jake watched, his heart pounding in his chest, his earlier shame battling with a growing sense of admiration. He had witnessed something extraordinary, something that transcended the mundane, something that had shaken him to his core. He had judged a man based on his appearance, dismissed him based on his clothes, and in doing so, had missed out on witnessing a performance that was both breathtaking and deeply moving. The applause finally subsided, leaving a lingering silence that was even more profound than the initial hush. Samuel smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes, a smile that radiated warmth and gratitude. He spoke a few words, thanking the audience for their enthusiastic reception, his voice humble and sincere. The patrons continued to shower him with praise, their words a mixture of awe and appreciation. They spoke of the power of his music, the depth of his lyrics, the raw emotion that poured from his soul. They spoke of the way he had transported them to another realm, the way he had touched their hearts with his artistry. Jake listened, his shame intensifying with each word of praise. He had missed out on all of this, had allowed his own prejudices to blind him to the extraordinary talent that stood before him. He had judged a man based on his appearance, dismissed him based on his clothes, and in doing so, had missed out on witnessing a performance that was both breathtaking and deeply moving. He felt a growing sense of regret, a deep remorse for his earlier actions. He had been wrong, profoundly wrong, and the weight of his error pressed down on him, a crushing burden of guilt and shame. He had allowed his own biases to cloud his judgment, to prevent him from seeing the truth, to prevent him from appreciating the extraordinary talent that stood before him. The performance ended, but the impact lingered, a lingering echo in the minds of the patrons. The bar was abuzz with conversation, the air filled with a mixture of excitement, admiration, and a lingering sense of awe. But for Jake, the evening was far from over. He had a reckoning to face, a debt to repay, a lesson to learn. The quiet dignity of Samuel's earlier departure had been replaced by the thunderous applause of a captivated audience, and the weight of his own prejudice was heavier than ever before. The night had transformed from a routine shift into a profound lesson in humility and the devastating consequences of unchecked bias. The initial shock and awe of Samuel's performance gradually gave way to a buzz of excited conversation. Patrons lingered, reluctant to leave the lingering magic of the evening. They recounted their favorite moments, shared their interpretations of the lyrics, and debated the nuances of Samuel's masterful guitar playing. The air thrummed with a vibrant energy, a collective euphoria born from the shared experience of witnessing something truly extraordinary. Amidst the celebratory atmosphere, Jake remained rooted to his spot behind the bar, a silent observer to the unfolding scene. He felt a profound sense of isolation, a stark contrast to the camaraderie and shared excitement that surrounded him. His earlier shame had deepened, morphing into a heavy weight of regret. He had missed the opportunity to witness Samuel's talent firsthand, to experience the magic of his performance, to be a part of the collective euphoria that filled the room. Instead, he had been blinded by his own prejudices, his own assumptions, his own ingrained biases. He watched as Samuel, still basking in the afterglow of his performance, engaged with the patrons, answering questions, signing autographs, and sharing stories from his long and illustrious career. He saw the genuine warmth in Samuel's interactions, the humility that belied his fame, the genuine connection he forged with his audience. It was a stark contrast to Jake's own cold and dismissive behavior earlier that evening. The contrast between Samuel's graciousness and Jake's own earlier rudeness was painful, a constant reminder of his own failings. He felt a deep sense of remorse, a crushing weight of guilt that threatened to overwhelm him. He wanted to apologize, to somehow make amends for his earlier behavior, but the words seemed to catch in his throat, trapped by a mixture of shame and fear. He watched as Samuel made his way towards the exit, his departure marking the end of the evening's magic. The patrons began to disperse, their voices filled with praise and admiration for the legendary musician. The bar, once filled with a vibrant energy, slowly emptied, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts, his regrets, and the crushing weight of his own prejudice. He felt a profound sense of isolation, a stark contrast to the camaraderie and shared excitement that had filled the room just moments before. He was alone with his shame, alone with his regrets, alone with the consequences of his own actions. He had missed an opportunity not just to witness a great performance, but to connect with a fellow human being, to share in a moment of shared joy and appreciation. Instead, he had allowed his own biases to cloud his judgment, to prevent him from seeing the truth, to prevent him from appreciating the extraordinary talent that had graced his bar. He began to clean up, his movements mechanical, his mind racing. He replayed the evening in his mind, dissecting each moment, analyzing every detail. He saw his own arrogance, his own dismissiveness, his own casual prejudice. He saw the way he had judged Samuel based on his appearance, dismissed him based on his clothes, and in doing so, had missed out on witnessing a performance that was both breathtaking and deeply moving. He felt a growing sense of self-loathing, a deep remorse for his earlier actions. He had been wrong, profoundly wrong, and the weight of his error pressed down on him, a crushing burden of guilt and shame. He knew he needed to make amends, to somehow repair the damage he had done, but he wasn't sure how. The night had ended, but the consequences of his actions would linger, a constant reminder of his own failings, a testament to the destructive power of unchecked prejudice. The silence of the empty bar was deafening, a stark contrast to the thunderous applause that had filled the room just moments before. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, heavy and inescapable. The bar was quiet, the usual Friday night buzz replaced by an almost eerie stillness. Jake, alone amidst the empty glasses and scattered napkins, felt the weight of the evening pressing down on him. The lingering silence amplified his inner turmoil, the emptiness of the bar mirroring the emptiness he felt inside. He had spent the last hour cleaning, wiping, polishing, the repetitive motions of futile attempt to scrub away the stain of his prejudice. But the shame remained, a persistent ache in his chest, a constant reminder of his earlier error. He replayed the evening in his mind, each moment a painful reminder of his own failings. He saw Samuel's quiet dignity, his unassuming demeanor, the way he had carried himself with grace and composure despite the blatant disrespect he had been shown. He saw the way Samuel's music had captivated the audience, the way it had transcended the mundane, the way it had touched their hearts and souls. And he saw his own behavior, his own arrogance, his own casual prejudice, his own thoughtless dismissal of a man based solely on his appearance. The contrast was stark, painful, and inescapable. He had judged a book by its cover, dismissed a man based on his clothes, and in doing so, had missed out on witnessing something truly extraordinary. He had allowed his own biases to cloud his judgment, to prevent him from seeing the truth, to prevent him from appreciating the extraordinary talent that had graced his bar. He felt a deep sense of regret, a crushing weight of guilt that threatened to overwhelm him. He wanted to make amends, to somehow repair the damage he had done, but he wasn't sure how. He couldn't undo his earlier actions, couldn't erase the memory of his rudeness, couldn't recapture the opportunity he had missed. All he could do was grapple with the consequences of his own behavior, to confront the prejudices that had led him to act so thoughtlessly. He considered approaching Tony, the bar owner, confessing his mistake, seeking his forgiveness. But the thought filled him with a mixture of shame and fear. He wasn't sure how Tony would react, wasn't sure if he would understand, wasn't sure if he deserved forgiveness. He thought about trying to contact Samuel to apologize for his behavior, to express his admiration for his music. But the thought felt presumptuous, almost intrusive. He wasn't sure if Samuel would even want to hear from him, wasn't sure if an apology would be enough to repair the damage he had done. He was left alone with his thoughts, his regrets, and the crushing weight of his own prejudice. The silence of the empty bar was deafening, a stark contrast to the thunderous applause that had filled the room just moments before. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, heavy and inescapable. He knew he had to do something, had to make amends, had to find a way to atone for his behavior. But the path forward remained unclear, shrouded in a mixture of shame, regret, and the lingering uncertainty of how to repair the damage he had done. The night had ended, but the consequences of his actions would linger, a constant reminder of his own failings, a testament to the destructive power of unchecked prejudice. The quiet of the bar was a stark contrast to the storm raging within him. The next morning, the weight of the previous night's events still pressed heavily on Jake. He'd slept little, tossing and turning, haunted by the image of Samuel's performance, the thunderous applause, and the crushing weight of his own prejudice. He'd replayed the encounter countless times in his mind, dissecting every detail, searching for a way to understand his own behavior, to make sense of the error he had made. He arrived at the Blue Note earlier than usual, the familiar routine offering a temporary distraction from his inner turmoil. He began his preparations, his movements mechanical, his mind still racing. He polished glasses, wiped down the counter, arranged the bottles, each action a futile attempt to escape the weight of his guilt. Tony arrived shortly after, his usual jovial demeanor subdued. He seemed to sense Jake's unease, his usual cheerful greetings replaced by a quiet observation. He watched Jake work, his expression unreadable, a silent acknowledgement of the previous night's events. The silence between them was heavy, thick with unspoken tension. Jake knew he had to speak, had to confess his mistake, had to seek forgiveness. But the words seemed to catch in his throat, trapped by a mixture of shame and fear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jake found his voice. He confessed his actions, his words tumbling out in a rush of guilt and remorse. He described his initial judgment of Samuel, his dismissive behavior, his thoughtless refusal of service. He spoke of his shame, his regret, his deep remorse for his actions. Tony listened patiently, his expression remaining unreadable. When Jake finished, Tony remained silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the bar. Then, he spoke, his voice calm and measured. He didn't condone Jake's behavior, didn't excuse his prejudice, but he understood the complexities of ingrained biases, the subtle ways in which prejudice can manifest itself. He spoke of his own experiences with prejudice, his own struggles to overcome his own biases. He acknowledged the difficulty of confronting one's own prejudices, the effort it takes to unlearn ingrained behaviors, the constant vigilance required to ensure that one's actions align with one's values. He spoke of the importance of empathy, of understanding, of recognizing the humanity in others, regardless of their appearance or background. He emphasized the need to challenge one's own assumptions, to question one's own biases, to strive to treat everyone with respect and dignity. He offered Jake a chance to make amends, not just to him, but to Samuel. He suggested that Jake could reach out to Samuel, offer a sincere apology, and express his admiration for his music. He emphasized the importance of taking responsibility for one's actions, of acknowledging one's mistakes, and of striving to do better in the future. Jake listened intently, his heart filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. He knew he had a long way to go, a lot of work to do, but he felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that redemption was possible. The path forward remained unclear, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to confront his own prejudices, to learn from his mistakes, and to strive to be a better person. The weight of his guilt remained, but it was now accompanied by a sense of hope, a belief that he could make amends, could repair the damage he had done, could learn from his mistakes, and could emerge from this experience a changed man. The morning brought not only the start of a new day, but the start of a journey of self-reflection and personal growth. The task of contacting Samuel felt monumental. Jake spent the better part of the day agonizing over the best approach, rehearsing his apology in his mind, anticipating Samuel's reaction. He considered a formal letter, a phone call, an email. Each option felt inadequate. Each approach seemed to fall short of conveying the depth of his remorse. He knew a simple apology wouldn't suffice. He needed to express his genuine regret, his profound admiration for Samuel's talent, and his commitment to confronting his own prejudices. Finally, he decided on a handwritten letter. He chose a fine stationery, a simple yet elegant card that reflected the seriousness of his intentions. He wrote slowly, carefully choosing his words, pouring his remorse and admiration onto the page. He described his initial judgment, his thoughtless dismissal, and the profound impact Samuel's performance had had on him. He expressed his deep regret for his actions, his shame at his own prejudice, and his sincere admiration for Samuel's talent. He didn't expect forgiveness, didn't even know if Samuel would respond, but he felt compelled to express his remorse, to take responsibility for his actions, to offer a genuine apology. He included his contact information, not expecting a response, but leaving the door open for communication. He mailed the letter, a small act of contrition in the face of a much larger problem. The act of writing the letter, of expressing his remorse on paper, was cathartic, a small step towards confronting his own prejudices and making amends for his actions. The days that followed were filled with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. He waited for a response, checking his mail multiple times a day, his hopes rising and falling with each passing hour. He found himself more attentive to the nuances of human interaction, more aware of his own biases, more sensitive to the subtle ways in which prejudice can manifest itself. He was actively trying to unlearn ingrained behaviors, to challenge his own assumptions, to treat everyone with respect and dignity. He was more mindful of his interactions with the bar's patrons, more attentive to their needs, more courteous in his demeanor. He made a conscious effort to engage with them on a more personal level, to show genuine interest in their lives, to foster a sense of community within the bar. He was striving to create a more welcoming and inclusive environment, a space where everyone felt valued and respected. He continued his work at the Blue Note, his usual efficiency now infused with a newfound sense of purpose. He was no longer just a bartender. He was a man on a journey of self-reflection and personal growth. He was actively working to overcome his own prejudices, to challenge his own biases, to become a better person. The waiting was agonizing. The silence was deafening. Then one afternoon, a package arrived. It was a small, unassuming package, but it held within it the potential for reconciliation, for forgiveness, for redemption. It was a response from Samuel. Jake's heart pounded as he carefully opened the package, his hands trembling slightly. Inside, he found a simple note, a short but heartfelt message, and a signed copy of Samuel's latest album. The note expressed Samuel's acceptance of Jake's apology, his understanding of the complexities of ingrained biases, and his hope that Jake would continue on his path of self-reflection and personal growth. The weight of his guilt lessened, replaced by a sense of hope, a belief that redemption was possible. The path to healing was long, but he had taken the first step. The weight of guilt that had burdened Jake for weeks began to lift, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. Samuel's response, while brief, had been profoundly impactful. The acceptance, the understanding, the hope expressed in his note had resonated deeply, offering a glimmer of redemption. The signed album felt like a tangible symbol of forgiveness, a physical manifestation of Samuel's willingness to move forward. It wasn't just a musical artifact. It was a testament to the power of empathy and the possibility of personal growth. Jake placed the album on the bar, its presence a constant reminder of his journey. He listened to it repeatedly, each song a meditation on his own failings, a soundtrack to his personal transformation. Samuel's music, once a source of shame, now served as a catalyst for change, a guide on his path towards a more just and equitable understanding of the world. He continued to work at the Blue Note, his interactions with the patrons marked by a newfound sensitivity and awareness. He made a conscious effort to engage with them on a more personal level, to listen to their stories, to create a welcoming and inclusive environment. He was actively challenging his own biases, questioning his own assumptions, striving to treat everyone with respect and dignity. He sought out opportunities to learn more about different cultures and perspectives, attending workshops and lectures, reading books, and engaging in conversations with people from diverse backgrounds. He was actively working to expand his understanding of the world, to challenge his own limited perspectives, to broaden his empathy. He also made a point of supporting local artists and musicians, attending their performances, promoting their work, and creating a space within the Blue Note for their expression. He wanted to create a venue that celebrated diversity, a place where everyone felt welcome, valued, and respected. He began to share his story with others, not as a means of seeking sympathy, but as a way of raising awareness about the insidious nature of prejudice and the importance of confronting one's own biases. He shared his experience with Tony, with his colleagues, with his friends, and with anyone who would listen. He wanted to use his experience as a catalyst for change, to inspire others to challenge their own assumptions and to strive for a more just and equitable world. His transformation wasn't instantaneous, nor was it without its challenges. There were moments of doubt, moments of relapse, moments when his old prejudices threatened to resurface. But each time, he reminded himself of Samuel's music, of Samuel's forgiveness, of the hope expressed in his note. He used those moments as opportunities for growth, as chances to learn from his mistakes, to challenge his own biases, and to strive to be a better person. The journey was ongoing, a lifelong commitment to self-reflection and personal growth. But he was committed to the process, committed to confronting his own prejudices, committed to creating a more just and equitable world. The path forward was clear, even if the destination remained distant. He had learned a profound lesson, a lesson that had changed him irrevocably. The shame of his past actions remained, but it was now overshadowed by a sense of purpose, a commitment to making amends, a determination to create a more just and equitable world, one interaction at a time. Months passed. The Blue Note thrived, its atmosphere transformed by Jake's newfound commitment to inclusivity and respect. He'd implemented changes, both subtle and significant, that reflected his personal growth. The music selection was more diverse, showcasing a wider range of artists and genres. He'd created a dedicated space for local musicians to perform, fostering a sense of community and shared artistic expression. He'd also instituted a more rigorous training program for his staff, emphasizing the importance of respectful and equitable service. His interactions with patrons had become more genuine, more empathetic, more mindful. He listened more attentively, engaged in meaningful conversations, and made a conscious effort to create a welcoming environment for everyone. He'd even started a small book club, featuring diverse authors and perspectives, further enriching the bar's atmosphere. The change wasn't just superficial. It was a reflection of Jake's internal transformation. He'd continued his journey of self-reflection, actively challenging his own biases and striving to become a more empathetic and understanding individual. He'd learned to recognize the subtle ways in which prejudice can manifest itself, not just in overt acts of discrimination, but in microaggressions and unspoken assumptions. He'd also become a vocal advocate for diversity and inclusion, sharing his story with others, inspiring them to confront their own biases and encouraging them to create more equitable spaces within their own communities. He'd spoken at local events, participated in workshops, and even started a small blog, sharing his insights and experiences. One evening, Samuel returned to the Blue Note. This time, there was no surprise performance, no dramatic unveiling. His arrival was quiet, unassuming, yet deeply significant. He sat at the bar, and Jake, with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation, approached him. There was no need for apologies or explanations. The shared understanding between them transcended words. They spoke of music, of life, of the journey of personal growth. They talked about the transformative power of art, the importance of empathy, and the ongoing struggle to overcome ingrained biases. As Samuel prepared to leave, he placed a small, unassuming package on the bar. Inside, Jake found a handwritten note, a simple thank you, and a new album. This time, it wasn't just a signed copy. It was a gift, a symbol of friendship, a testament to the power of reconciliation. The album was a collection of songs inspired by his journey of self-reflection, a musical reflection of his personal growth. Jake listened to the album, each song a reminder of the transformative power of art, the importance of empathy, and the ongoing journey towards a more just and equitable world. The music resonated deeply, a testament to the power of human connection, the possibility of redemption, and the ongoing struggle to overcome ingrained biases. The Blue Note was more than just a bar. It was a testament to the transformative power of empathy, a space where art and human connection could inspire positive change. The journey had been long and challenging, but Jake had emerged transformed, a better man, a better bartender, and a stronger advocate for a more just and equitable world. The quiet hum of the bar was a symphony of progress, a testament to the power of a single act of kindness and the transformative power of a simple apology.